Remember whataboutism? The notion that if somebody compares the behavior of a person that they admire to the behavior of a person that they don't admire and say, well, what about them? They got away with it. That is somehow flawed or programmed into people. I remember when I used to talk about whataboutism. That's whataboutism. That's whataboutism. So I'm here to tell you that whataboutism is good. Of course you shouldn't falsely accuse anyone, and of course you shouldn't try to justify something that someone actually did, even if you agree with them or like them. I cannot think of a single reason why whataboutism is bad. It's only, quote, bad if the person you're saying what about the person you don't like or you don't agree with is not really doing anything worse, that you're distorting one of the people's actions. If you're trying to justify, then yes, whataboutism is a fallacy, logical fallacy. But if you are not trying to justify, what is the purpose of whataboutism? Often with propaganda involved, it's the only way to realize something is up. And that is why so many people are saying, hey, Jeffrey Epstein's client list hasn't been investigated. They should be combing through that. What, are you surprised? They killed him in prison and none of the evidence has been preserved at all. Nothing was recorded. Everything was accidentally deleted. Whoops! Even the photos, I think. But they haven't investigated a single thing, right? When a patriot, one of us who is awake, says, this tells us all we need to know, because they're going after Trump for 91 charges, and yet not only are they letting unknown, random, very, very sick and traumatized individuals committing crimes, they're letting them back out, which makes no sense, but they're also protecting people who very obviously have done much, much worse things, at least that we know of, according to the evidence, than President Trump. Just look at President Clinton's nearly $1 million payoff to Paula Jones. What was that for? She wasn't allowed to say anything. And that was just fine. I mean, I'm saying that not to justify President Trump's NDA, because I hate NDAs. I hate them. I've signed one in my life. They're stupid. What is the one reason to have an NDA? Because if you do something wrong, you don't want your employee or whoever talking about it. Now, I happen to believe that this Cohen NDA, because it was not signed by President Trump, I happen to believe there's more to this story. What it is, I don't know. President Trump he insisted just 2 days ago after the verdict that nothing had ever happened. So where do we go from here? Comparing it to Bill Clinton, comparing this to other NDAs, it is helpful, actually, because it makes people stop. I mean, there's very little to wake people up. Very little. In this day and age, people really kind of are lulled into complacency so that they're afraid of the boogeyman and a bunch of crazy things, which who knows the odds of them happening. But on the other hand, they think everything is all right. They're making plans for the summer. They're making plans for traveling. And, well, I would love to travel also. There's a war going on in Europe, and it shouldn't be happening. But there's very little to wake people up. However, if you see that the Epstein clients have not been prosecuted, that right there is a massive spin of omission that should be investigated. It's not saying necessarily that everyone on Epstein's client list is guilty as sin, I happen to think that there are a lot more criminals in power than we thought. I think there's a lot of craziness that goes on. But that's just my personal opinion after having done a lot of research. But let me go back to this whataboutism. If everything is suppressed and censored, the only way that you can wake people up is by showing the contrast. And then when propaganda and censorship become ubiquitous, it's everywhere, the only defense we have is the Constitution. Because if you go with preference or, I just don't like him, I've seen him speak, I don't like him, You are becoming judge. Does that mean that things that you've heard him say and when you've watched him speak are criminal acts? Or are you just convinced that this is a terrible man? Worse than the absolute buffoons that we now see have been running things? Yeah, whataboutism, right? But our system ensures that even someone who has been maligned and slammed with malice and canceled, even they will be protected, because we know the whims of humanity are fleeting, and we know that mobs and mob rule is fickle. And yet, why do we have demagogues? We have more demagogues like Nancy Pelosi and Hillary Clinton who are whipping up the mob than we have people saying the Constitution is the only thing protecting any of us from the mob. When there is no rule of law, the people in charge, they cry, rule of law, rule of law. No one is above the law. And it's then that you see, wait a minute, well, I know he was above the law, and I know he was above the law. And I know they changed the venue for the police that beat Rodney King. They moved it to very, very white, middle-class Simi Valley. And they got an acquittal. Do you understand how the justice system can be manipulated as long as everyone's in on it? And that the Constitution and maybe a good independent lawyer are all that stand between us and a life in prison or even death? It's really powerful, because it means if we don't know all the facts personally, and we're not quite sure if they're telling us the truth, those that are condemning people in the media, we had better fight for all of the accused. And those we know are guilty through evidence, make sure they don't get away with it. That's our job now. The Constitution, justice, and freedom are so uniquely American. So I don't believe in American exceptionalism. That's ridiculous. Because we cannot act with impunity or it will be our downfall. But I do believe that the flame of freedom and the right to free speech and free press and freedom of religion is absolutely sacrosanct. Because without it, innocent people will be sent to either the proverbial gallows or the real gallows. And no one will be held accountable.